Guys, thanks for coming for this panel discussion. This is Chris from Berachain, and I'm gonna moderator for this panel. As you can see, it's a super interesting panel speakers. I will let everyone to introduce themselves, starting from here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Griffin Anderson, and I'm the founder of Phi Labs and working and contributing to a protocol called Archway within the Cosmos space.
Hey everyone, I'm Sun. I'm co-founder of 7Cs. We build DeFi vaults, also a contributor to Sommelier Finance, a platform for running DeFi strategies.
Hey guys, I'm Smokey the Bear from Berachain, and I'm one of the co-founders. We turn liquidity into security and use it to power the applications building on top of the chain, powered by proof of liquidity, and I feel in danger.
Hi everyone, I'm Fabian. I'm the co-founder of Kyve Network. We're also a Cosmos chain. We're doing data archiving actually for some of the guys here as well. And so, yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. Yeah. So as you guys can see, this panel's topic gonna be Layer 1 vs Appchain. So first questions for all of the speakers. What are the specific considerations developers should take into account when deciding whether to build their own project on a Layer 1, general purpose Layer 1, or an Appchain, or as an Appchain?
All right. So actually at Kyve, we have made both experiences. So we started out building a smart contract on Ethereum, and then very quickly realized maybe it wasn't the best idea we ever had doing that. Basically because every time where you need your own block space, so I always like to say if you have lots of transactions and they don't have that much value, build your own app chain. If you have not many transactions but they have a lot of value, like a Uniswap swap, for example, right? Like if you make 10K profit on a swap, you're fine paying like $100 in gas fee. Other than that, if you have a high throughput chain, so to say, it's better if you build your app chain. And this is kind of like the experience we made. So first couple of months, we built out the archiving part of Kyve was always independent. The token part was actually on a smart contract. And we realized we need to kind of like switch to the Cosmos SDK because it fitted our use case much better. And so basically since a year and a half now, we are our own sovereign app chain built on the Cosmos SDK.
Yeah, I think that the argument is very dependent on the actual degree of product market fit of the protocol, which is to say that there's a lot of app chains that exist right now that don't really have many people using them, while they still have a fair bit of overhead to deal with in terms of a validator set, in terms of management. And while I do think there's a ton of advantages that are gained from that, in many cases the EV math does not necessarily work out. My instinct is that in a world where you have a ton of users, a ton of volume, the ability to capture a meaningful amount of MEV, have a super clean mempool, etc., and are actually suffering some of those limitations on the chain that you live on, the smart contract application to app chain evolution or upgrade, if you will, is a really sensible path. But I think that my biggest issue, and I'm obviously biased as an L1 founder, to date with the app chain thesis has been the lack of app chains that actually merit the degree of use to have an app chain.
Yeah, I think my view is that for most projects that are launching, you should not build an app chain. You should probably launch it as an app on another chain because you get benefits from like the existing network effects, liquidity, etc. I think you should basically build an app chain if you have to. And the reason you might have to is that you're doing something interesting at the consensus level, you're doing something interesting at various parts of the stack that you can't directly port over to an L1. And so, yeah, Sommelier is actually an app chain that exists exclusively to power DeFi strategies on other chains. This is a version of like a system that's kind of a hybrid. I think in general we're going to see these kind of worlds collide. We're already seeing this on Ethereum with their roll-up roadmap. So, yeah, I think like if you have a really good reason to build an app chain, you should do it. Otherwise, launch on an L1, build up a network, build up users. And when you have a strong enough community that you can take over and the marginal utility of going to an app chain is high, then you should do it.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing everybody else already said. As you go to building your own app-specific chain, you get more customization, more flexibility around consensus and how the network works and all the other items. But there is a cost to that, and that typically means it's more expensive and more costly to run your own app-specific chain or your own self-sovereign chain. And so you have to kind of weigh the benefits. We see this paradigm play out in the Web 2.0 space quite often. So most web apps will start off as a platform as a service, building on top of a Heroku or a Google App Engine, building the specific app. And then as you start to customize and your product continues to grow, you start to want to continue to own the server resources. So you might move to AWS or Google Cloud. And then if you get really, really big, you start to run your own servers in your own warehouse. And so we think of it the same way. It's like when you get started, it probably makes sense to start off as an app. But then as your app and your ecosystem begins to grow, maybe it makes sense to start to move off into its own self-sovereign chain.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Definitely, the app chains and general purpose layer ones have pros and cons on each side. So definitely, as a developers, you should consider very carefully before you make the decision. The second question is for today: how do app chains and layer ones differ in terms of end user experience? Because we all know that UX experience is actually one of the most important issues right now that we're trying to solve to onboard more new users into the space. So, like, is there a significant difference in adoption rates or like barriers of entrance for new users for your app chains or layer ones?
Yeah, I actually think there is quite a difference depending on what ecosystem you are in. So let's say, right, you're a smart contract on Ethereum, right? That's perfect. You have access to liquidity, you have access to good development tools, you have access to custody providers, exchanges. There's not need much of an integration that needs to be done. And I think the more unique or exclusive your app chain gets, the more trickier it also gets for the users, right? Because you need to, like, I don't know, do custom wallet integration. Some app chains maybe even have their custom wallets, so you need to onboard your user to those and things like this. Actually, I think in the Cosmos space, actually, it's quite nice because it's such a big space and such a standardized space as well that it's kind of like this sweet spot, in my opinion, between like, okay, you have access to like all the tools like an Ethereum ecosystem maybe has, whereas it's kind of like, I don't know, like an Arweave, for example, that is very, very custom, and basically there your access to like traditional dev tools, wallets and stuff is like not so easy to access. I would probably say it's a worse user experience compared if you're like a traditional onboarded Ethereum user, and I think the Cosmos SDK is in the sweet spot there. In the center, I mean, everyone uses Kepler. MetaMask now also works with some of the chains and things like this. And so I think you have a trade-off being an app chain in terms of user experience. But I think it really pays off then because on the other side, you give a better user experience when they use your application because it's actually tailored to the use case that you want to provide compared to like some more standardized use case.
Yeah, I think I partially agree with some of that and I partially disagree. To take perhaps the contrarian viewpoint on this panel, I think that generally the Cosmos, UX is horrible, and most folks I know who are trying to, go from EVM to Cosmos have a very difficult time. Now that might be a lack of sophistication on the average EVM user, but I also think that when you look at where the majority of capital lives, the majority of application developers live, and the majority of dev tooling and infrastructure that actually allows for improvements in user behavior or user experience to occur, the EVM landscape is one that should be, I'd say, given some time of day. It really does come down to the ecosystem itself and what it features, as you mentioned. So if you're building on a new chain, for example, like ours, it may not be as complete, but there's things that can help along the way, whether that be on-ramps, account abstraction platforms, wallets, everything of the sort, bridging software, everything in between. I think that the biggest thing, actually, is not really whether it's an L1 or an app chain, but it's really what tools you're able to arm the ecosystem with. I think that one of the largest things that has plagued the number of app chains to date, though, just from thinking about the pillars that an application needs to succeed. It needs access to users, it needs access to developers for other integrations, and it needs access to capital in some manner. And I often find that a number of these app chains suffer from a degree of liquidity defragmentation, or fragmentation, I should say, that's looking to be defragmented over time. IBC definitely helps move us in the right direction, but I don't think that we've seen an example of that, snowball into something truly massive as of yet. So in short, I think that it's really not dependent on whether it's an app chain or an L1, but to date, I would say the L1s have had a slightly better user experience just because of the ability to build around a massive foundation beyond a single app. With that being said, I think we're starting to see the rise of these like super apps or app chains with more and more integrated features that could very much turn the tides there in the future. Because as someone goes to a new L1, in many cases they don't actually know like what is the swap, what is the perps platform, what's the lend, what's the NFT marketplace, and certain app chains can certainly centralize or bring together a number of those features to make it easier for a new user to get involved. So low column A, low column B as I see it.
Yeah, I think trade-offs are the right way to like think about these things, and these trade-offs exist primarily because of how immature interoperability and composability are. So with an app chain, you have the opportunity to really like dial in your user experience, right? You can do things like solve MEV for them. You can like take care of routing without depending on like external parties. You can build all of that in the chain. The challenge from a user perspective is getting onto the chain, right? And that's a friction that exists because of how immature interop solutions are. So this is part of the reason why it makes sense to build an app chain if you have a really strong community, or to build like your own chain. Like Berachain's community is phenomenal. I think that the community that Berachain has will like crawl through glass to get to that chain, no matter what that experience is. And you almost need that kind of commitment and existing like traction, we can call it, to do this. But I think the end game looks different, right? Like the end game is where you have both the flexibility as a developer to like customize every part of the stack that you want, and like almost synchronous composability. I think that's the end game that everyone is building to, whether that's Solana, Ethereum, Cosmos. That's just not the state of things today. So you have to kind of make these trade-offs and make these choices, and have some opinion of where things are going to go and what you specifically need for your project.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing everybody else already said. Sometimes it's really difficult to onboard users to an app-specific or self-sovereign chain, partly because they all have their own native tokens, also because each chain has to be integrated in every integration partner, whether it's wallets, data, indexing, tooling, other infrastructure, and that all kind of comes with a cost. And so that's typically the concern. The positive side, what we're starting to see, at least in the Cosmos space, and for the Archway protocol and other L1s, is the abstraction of the user layer right now. And that's probably happening at a much faster speed than I think maybe in some of the other major L1 ecosystems right now, where we're starting to see, just the end user accounts be completely abstracted away. You'll start to see gasless transactions and free gas in Cosmos. So there's so much coming down the pipeline right now. And the customization around your own app-specific chain enables all that kind of stuff. So the pro is basically, it's much easier to do those customizations and really reach the end user in those end specific use cases. The con is, you still have to integrate with everything, and it's hard to sometimes get network effects around that.
Yeah, thank you guys for the answers. And next questions. How do Appchains tokenomics models facilitate value capture differently from layer 1 blockchains? I think there are especially the speakers have there are very interesting tokenomics designed. So is there a huge difference in how value flows back to the ecosystem participants in any stage?
Yeah, actually, I would say this is one of the most fundamental difference. Actually, if you build an app chain compared to some smart contract on an L1, is because you have the availability. Sorry, you have the possibility. There you go. To fine-tune your tokenomics to basically fit your use case perfectly, which is something that is so unique that you just don't have building your traditional smart contract or something like this. It helped us at Kyve actually a lot, being able to fine-tune the tokenomics. Of course, the big downside that comes building your own sovereign app chain is that you also have to, if it's proof of stake, right, actually have a token that resembles a valuable amount of security for your chain to actually be secure, right? That is the nice thing, be a smart contract on Ethereum, and you have all the security that Ethereum gives you. As your own sovereign app chain, you don't have that, you need to build it yourself. Can be basically a hit or miss, and that's probably the most trickiest part. It's the downside of it. The pro is you can really tinker it to whatever customized things you want to do, leading to better user experience, better value capture, and just in general, just better experience overall.
Yeah, I think I'm going to start this with a little bit of a confession, which is that while Berachain's an L1, we actually sit at this weird intersection between an L1 and an app chain, because there's a certain set of applications that are built into the base layer to power what we call proof of liquidity. So when Berachain goes live, there's a DEX, there's a perps vault, and there's a lending market, basically baked into the chain. And what's really interesting is that allows for value capture, from the users from the start that can actually be redirected across people who are driving value into the ecosystem. So, what I think is quite interesting to see from like somewhere between Appchain and general purpose blockchain point of view is that, actually embedding applications into the blockchain gives you an opportunity to, I think, redirect value flows across the ecosystem. For just very quick context, the way Berachain works is that instead of validators keeping the majority of their block rewards, they actually forward them or basically redirect them to applications living on top of the chain and the various pools in those applications in exchange for a portion of those applications' fees going towards the users who are staking BGT, the governance token of the network that's only obtained by providing liquidity. So without turning this into a Berachain show, what I actually think is really cool is that at the intersection space between Appchains and general purpose blockchains, you open up a number of opportunities to redirect value flow to actually do something that I think enables the grander vision here. Like when we think about Appchains as a whole, I think that if you have a massive corporate group, right, like whether that be a major bank, an E-Trade type platform, I think they would actually do much better by building an app chain than a general purpose blockchain because they know exactly what needs to be built. They have users, they can customize the living hell out of it, they can do whatever they want. They can capture the MEV, et cetera. And there's a reason for them to do so and to underwrite that cost. Right, when we're starting to see with stuff like superfluid staking from Osmosis, with stuff like I think the way we think about BGT driving value to the people who are actually encouraging the build out of the next generation of applications that can adopt and bring on the next million users with product market fit, I think we're starting to see a way that people can have a greater degree of control over what they do than ever before. So again, while it is on a very case by case basis, I think that the degree of tokenomics flexibility is relatively unparalleled and a lot more straightforward than you get in many other app chain-like ecosystems or just plain governance token models.
Yeah, I think this question of how do apps control where the value flows, it's definitely easier to do that if you're building an app chain, right? You have control of the full stack, you can kind of build it in. I will say that I think a lot of people assume that it's impossible to do this as a smart contract on an L1, and that's definitely not the case, right? We're already, as of today, the vast majority of apps on Ethereum, for example, definitely are leaking all of their value. You can think of MEV, right? They're leaking all of that value primarily to validators in the existing system. But you have, this is just a question of app design, right? When you're on an L1, you have, more constraints. And so it's harder to develop an app that redirects flow to where you want it or value to where you want it. But it's possible. So you can look at Uniswap, right? Uniswap X is a system that is effectively capturing the MEV that is created by users on Uniswap. And it does this by a system, by an off-chain auction system. And it's redirecting that value back to users, right? Now, could Uniswap direct that value elsewhere? They certainly could. This is just an app design question. So that's the point I'll flag where it's definitely easier to control, to have fine-grained control of where value is flowing in an app chain, but you can do it on an L1, and you might want to do that given some of the benefits that exist for launching on an L1, if possible.
Yeah, so we kind of help pioneer value capture. The Archway protocol, what it does is it actually rewards smart contract devs that are building on top of the protocol. And the way it does it is it shares part of the inflation and emission that's typically just goes to validators or miners and programmatically actually redirects some of that inflation back to the dApp devs. Conversely, we share some of the gas fees, and then finally we will allow for customization of fees all together within the smart contract. So the smart contract dev can charge whatever they want for their smart contracts. And what's really cool is that value all accrues towards the developer or to a specific smart contract that they define, and then they can use that value in however way they see fit. They can use it to redirect back to their end users. They can use the value to basically redirect it to a DAO. They can use it to subsidize gas fees. It's completely configurable and customizable, all up to them, and doesn't go through governance or anything like that. So something we've been really thinking about in pioneering is how do you extend that value to all users and all different stakeholders a part of the protocol, and not just typically the validators and miners that run the network. And so the Archway protocol is working towards that and trying to do it in a decentralized way that doesn't necessarily go through governance or isn't through a permission chain, but do it in a permissionless way. And that's kind of where we're focusing.
Yeah, thank you very much for the answers. I think we have time for one last question. This is actually a question that frustrated me a little bit. So for now, I think we can see a path that for example, a team built an app, and the app turned out to be very successful, and they might spin up their own app chains, like DYDX, and when the app chains grow to a certain level, they might think to how to grow to the next stage because of the bottleneck, and they might gradually transform from an app chain to a more generous purpose chain, and it's like a dead end loop. So like, what do you guys think about this? And just want to know opinions.
Yeah, I think that is a very interesting question, because you could kind of argue that like Ethereum, right, in the beginning was an app chain because it was built well specifically for smart contracts, right? And now we say, oh, it's an L1, we need app chains because actually the app chain back in the days doesn't fit our app use case anymore. And so I think you're totally right. On one way, there is this kind of like generalization happening, right? Like, oh, when there's kind of like, and it's like this chicken egg problem almost in a way, like, right? Like when do we have so much use case on your chain basically that it's starting to generalize, and when do people like have their own ideas what they want to build on top, and then they switch away? And I don't even know if there is a solution to this. I think what is really crucial on the app chains is then like token design and value capture, really, because this is probably what is still then unique between all those different chains and what's really important on. And I think it also really depends if you build an app chain that allows other people to build their own use cases on top of, right? Or if you basically just, don't allow them, so to say, to do anything crazy and say, hey, look, this is the use case of our app chain. Use it, like Arweave and data storage, right? I can only store data on Arweave. That's all I can do, but it's fine because it's an app chain, right? If I want to do smart contracting, I have to go somewhere else and somehow connect it with my app chain, which is then when all like the modular idea comes into play, right? And this is honestly like also a big thesis of mine. I think over the next couple of years, we're going to see more and more chains being interoperable, more and more specific app chains. I think roll-up is kind of like, the trend we're already seeing, right? Like, okay, we take off compute with Kyve, okay, we take off data off your chain, so you can scale differently. You don't have to worry about providing like generalizability in a way. But in the end, I think it is still a chicken egg problem that's most likely not solved, but probably just differentiates itself from like token design, value capture, user base, and things like that.
Yeah, I think that the cycle that you described initially is fairly accurate and makes a lot of sense. There's, of course, nuance based on the context under how an app chain comes to be or an application comes to be, and its initial user base, capital support, etc. But I think the system of, when we think about what actually gives a lot of edge to applications in the space, it's a degree of composability and interoperability that you have that's, greater in many cases than that which you can see in the traditional financial system, right? So if we want to actually be able to lead into that and develop more and more use cases, whether they're more single shot to start, like, something like Arweave, or something that ends up a lot more intertwined, like your Uniswamps and GMXs and Aves and so on and so forth, or in Cosmos, your Strides and Celestias and your Archways and everything in between. I think that it really does come down to the ability to plug and play components in a very simple manner. I think that is still to start most easily accomplished within an L1 context. So that evolution of like smart contract living in an L1, to perhaps Appchain makes sense if that degree of interoperability and composability can be maintained. That being said, again, the nuance kicks in, right? If it's a scenario where you only want one use case, dial in, optimize it to the end of the day, then it probably doesn't even need to happen. But I do think that the underlying infrastructure cost and the ease of spinning up app chains will continue to decrease, or will continue to increase in terms of like reduced friction over time, such that we can see more of this app chain-centric future, even with groups like Initia and like Celestia that have announced fundraisers recently that have built massive advances in this space.
It's definitely this interesting phenomenon, right, where the incentives are such that the whole point of app chains are you do one thing really well, right? You optimize in this thing, but the incentives seem to be that once you've built community, you've built a network, you want to capture the value that network generates, so you're going to build more features, add new functionality. I don't know if this is like a negative thing. I think this is just what the incentives are. I don't know what the steady state looks like. Especially as composability and interop improves, maybe the incentives to do this go down. But it's definitely this funny thing where there's this like cycle, right? Like you launch an app on an L1, you gain traction, you move that to an app chain. Now that app chain gains traction, and so you have to turn that into an L1, and there's this cycle that repeats, right? So it's just an interesting thing. I don't know if it's good or bad. I don't have a solution for it, but we'll see how things play out as interop improves.
Yeah, I don't think I have too much anything unique to really add to what the panel said, but yeah, that meme kind of went on the internet and on Twitter, crypto Twitter, recently over the last couple of months. And the challenge is block space is commoditized across the board. And so every L1's trying to figure out a way to provide value to the end dApps and the end user and the end ecosystem. And as they do that, they have to start customizing their chain themselves. But then as you start to get real custom, you run into very app-specific chains, and the problem is their value kind of gets maxed out at their specific use case. So they hit this local maximum, and then what they try to do is they look to expand and to add other dApps and other apps to their ecosystem. So they go from being very app-specific to a very specific use case to opening it up to all kinds of use cases, which you're kind of seeing kind of play out on some chains within the Cosmos space right now. And the challenge is then they start to move towards this generalized L1 space. But then as you do, your block space is commoditized. You have less to offer that's unique as a selling position. And so you get this virtual cycle that we kind of see play out all the time. And so that's one of the challenges between the two. Since this is the last question, could the audience please do me a favor? Give me a round of applause if you think I should shoot Smokey on stage here. And if he opts in, no, yes, we got a couple yeses. Smokey, are you in? All right, he's in. Is that okay? All right, it's a Nerf gun, so it shouldn't hurt too much. Okay.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for the one of the best costume panels discussion ever. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.